November hours. The Riverless near the village of Neuchâtel. The formidable armored regiment of the Waffen-SS Panzer Division Hitler Marsch had meticulously established an impregnable killing ground. The battered, overlooked weaponry that accompanied the reconnaissance unit that very morning represented the Allies' sole hope against the formidable concrete fortifications. The SS troops derisively labeled it the Americans' paper tube due to its unimpressive exterior. However, the soldiers who wielded it were soon to discover its singular, chilling efficacy in transforming solid fortifications into mass graves. The vital crossroads at Nashel, strategically positioned along the heavily defended riverless sector, had become the linchpin of the autumn offensive. The advancing Allied Timberwolf Division, pushing towards the German frontier, had found its progress halted by a defensive masterpiece conceived by SS Brigade Führer Heinz. Heinz, a seasoned veteran of the Eastern Front's brutal attrition warfare, had internalized the harsh reality of mobile conflict. Americans could not be effectively engaged in open terrain. They needed to be ensnared. In stark defiance of prevailing German military doctrine, Heinz had directed his forces to forsake traditional static trench lines. Instead, he orchestrated a complex web of interconnected firing positions, comprising 14 heavily reinforced concrete bunkers, each fortified with walls up to 2 feet thick, arranged in a checkerboard pattern across a narrow, waterlogged floodplain. The sole avenues of approach were across open ground, perfectly situated for overlapping machine gun crossfire. At the heart of this formidable defense, concealed beneath a derelict farmhouse, lay the primary command center and medical facilities, protected by enough reinforced masonry to withstand a direct artillery impact. Allied assault strategies, which had proven consistently successful since the Normandy breakout, were now proving disastrous. Artillery barrages, effective against earthen defenses, barely scratched the paint on the concrete fire blocks. Tank cannons from the accompanying Mermens lacked the penetrating power to breach the substantial ferro-concrete at range. Direct infantry assaults, relying on satchel charges and flamethrowers, were neutralized long before they reached their objectives. The SS had ingeniously designed their firing ports to be narrow and angled, precluding the insertion of portable weaponry. A full week of relentless fighting had resulted in staggering Allied casualties with no discernible territorial gains. The Allied commander, facing depleted ranks and mounting frustration, desperately needed a breakthrough. Intelligence gleaned from a captured engineer corroborated Heinz's revolutionary tactical assessment. The defense had accounted for every American weapon currently in service: heavy artillery, tank guns, and standard infantry armaments. They had constructed a fortress that was, in essence, unassailable. The Japanese at Saipan had already demonstrated the immense cost of static defenses. Now, Heinz had proven that concrete and terrain could overcome even overwhelming firepower. The sole weapon that the SS had failed to anticipate was one that the Americans themselves viewed as an interim failure: the temperamental new launcher. This weapon, introduced to the front by a small contingent of reconnaissance engineers, had not even been formally designated for anti-fortification duties. It was the T anti-tank launcher, affectionately nicknamed the Dragon's Tooth by the Ordnance Corps due to its oversized, peculiar warhead and its notorious recoil. It was notoriously unreliable. Its ignition system frequently malfunctioned in damp conditions, and its accuracy beyond 50 yards was a complete farce. SS troops observing American training films had witnessed their own soldiers laughing at its cumbersome nature, perceiving it as a clear sign of Allied desperation. Yet, the T harbored a technical secret that standard anti-tank rounds lacked: the shaped charge kinetic impact payload. Initially developed by a metallurgical team at the Detroit Arsenal, its warhead contained a shaped charge that, upon impact, detonated a copper lining, concentrating the explosive force into a hypervelocity jet of superplasticized metal. This design maximized pressure at the point of impact, creating a minute, intensely focused breach. Crucially, the engineers at the front, notably a resourceful Captain Vance with a background in structural engineering, recognized the potential of this seemingly minor flaw. The resulting blast was insufficient to obliterate the bunker itself, but its specialized nature meant it wasn't attempting to pulverize the wall. It was designed to bore a needle-thin aperture. Vance's team concentrated their innovative efforts not on the launcher itself, but on the ammunition. They increased the density of the copper lining and, against all official admonitions, slightly destabilized the explosive filler to ensure a wider internal pressure wave post-penetration. Their plan was audacious, defying 3 years of demolition doctrine. They would not endeavor to destroy the fire blocks outright. Instead, they would exploit a singular vulnerability inherent in all modern concrete structures: internal air pressure. The T's jet could penetrate the wall, creating a clean aperture. Through this breach, they would immediately insert a novel invention: the compression tube, a simple spring-loaded piston device loaded with a high-yield white phosphorus charge and a secondary concussion grenade. The theoretical outcome was devastating. The T round would create the initial perforation. The compression tube would then be inserted and triggered. The subsequent blast and intense heat, confined within the sealed concrete bunker, would instantaneously overpressurize the chamber. Even if the SS troops survived the initial explosion, the rapid pressure surge and immediate oxygen depletion would render the position utterly unviable. The SS had meticulously accounted for external explosions and fire, but not for a catastrophic, instantaneous internal rupture. The paper tube was poised to become the dragon's tooth. November hours, Fireblock Delta 6. The deployment was agonizingly slow, meticulously precise, and demanded a complete inversion of standard operating procedures. The infantry did not conduct a direct assault. Instead, they served as specialized spotters, identifying blind spots in the SS machine gun coverage. A 2-man demolition team, led by Sergeant Kendrick, advanced under the cover of smoke to a range where the SS felt secure and the T remained marginally effective. The initial shot was a near miss, striking the earth and triggering the weapon's notoriously dangerous ignition delay. The SS position momentarily ceased firing, its occupants likely amused by the weapon's apparent failure. Kendrick's subsequent shot, fired a minute later, was perfect. It impacted the face of Delta 6 precisely where the concrete was thickest. There was no thunderous, satisfying explosion, only a sharp thwack and a faint puff of dust. The SS unit commander inside radioed a brief, mocking report. "Enemy firing flares from paper tubes. No damage. Resume fire." But Kendrick's team was already in motion. The second man, Private Harris, sprinted forward with the compression tube. He located the clean puncture, a needle in a concrete haystack, and thrust the tube into the opening, setting the spring-loaded charge deep within. A mere half-second later, the silence was shattered by a muffled, imploding boom from within. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The thick concrete walls shuddered. Smoke, thick and white from the phosphorus, billowed from every firing aperture, every seam, and every microscopic crack in the concrete. The roof of the bunker visibly bulged by an inch before settling back. When the clearing team cautiously approached, they discovered all of Delta 6's occupants deceased. They had not succumbed to shrapnel or direct heat. Post-mortem examinations confirmed massive internal trauma caused by the sudden, intense pressure spike. Their position, engineered to be impregnable from the outside, had been transformed into a pressurized chamber of death from within. Over the subsequent days, Kendrick's teams, operating under the cover of sustained artillery barrages to mask the distinctive sound of the T, systematically reduced the fire blocks. The SS radios, initially dismissive of the paper tubes, became increasingly frantic. Intercepted Allied intelligence documented a descent into panic. Delta 6 silenced. No sign of external fire. Request explanation, read one transmission. This was followed by, "The tubes are killing us. They make the walls collapse inwards." The enemy, bewildered, believed the Americans possessed some form of geological weapon, not a sophisticated shaped charge. The psychological collapse was complete. The defense, built on unwavering faith in concrete, was disintegrating from within. Before we transition back into the narrative, could you share where you're listening from? And if this story resonates with you, please ensure you're subscribed, as I have something particularly special saved for you tomorrow. The localized collapse of the fire block sent immediate shockwaves through the SS command structure. Brigade Führer Heinz, securely situated underground, initially dismissed the battlefield reports as the panicked exaggerations of junior officers. His defensive geometry was mathematically flawless. The positions were deemed impossible to neutralize without heavy siege weaponry. However, as the radio intercepts grew increasingly frantic and then abruptly ceased, one fire block after another falling silent, Heinz was compelled to confront the devastating reality that his impregnable fortress was dissolving. On November 14th, a field patrol recovered the bodies of the Delta 6 garrison. The meticulous inspection revealed the surgical precision of the entry point and the grotesque nature of the internal injuries. Heinz's engineers, stunned, realized the Americans had not employed a more powerful weapon. They had utilized a more intelligent, smaller one. The captured Japanese doctrine regarding the effectiveness of portable flamethrowers had influenced their design, but the underlying assumption was that the enemy would require substantial access points. They had never contemplated a weapon that could create its own micro-breach and then exploit the very environment of the bunker itself. His command post was designed to withstand virtually anything short of a direct aerial bombardment. His defensive order, codenamed Stalgist Steel Spirit, dictated that forward units must hold their ground at all costs, forcing the Americans to bleed out. Nevertheless, the psychological mechanism of defeat proved far more rapid than any physical attrition. The remaining 2 forward fire blocks were abandoned, not because they were directly hit, but at the mere report of Sergeant Kendrick's teams advancing. In an unprecedented breakdown of the rigid SS warrior ethos, SS troops, convinced they were facing an unstoppable internal explosion device, fled their positions, abandoning vital supplies and weaponry. This marked a complete disintegration of the esteemed SS Warrior Code. The division's intelligence section, monitoring the captured radio frequencies, meticulously documented this cascading collapse of morale. Interrogations of the few captured prisoners confirmed their abject fear. They no longer referred to the T as the paper tube, but as the shatterer or the whisper of death, for the attack was often silent, heralded only by a small thwack, followed by a sudden terrifying internal detonation. For the first time on this front, SS soldiers were choosing surrender over remaining within their meticulously prepared concrete defenses. Heinz, witnessing his defensive masterpiece transform into a deadly trap, found himself cornered. His command post had become a liability. On November 16th, he radioed Panzer HQ requesting permission to execute a withdrawal, an action that directly contravened his core orders. The request was summarily denied. His final decision, recorded in a recovered field note, was a desperate, doomed attempt to launch a counterattack. It involved a final, suicidal breakout attempt from their underground sanctuary, with the objective of destroying the T-teams before they could target the command post's vulnerable ventilation shaft. The successful neutralization of the fire blocks led to immediate battlefield adaptations and the establishment of entirely new operational doctrine. Captain Vance's reconnaissance engineers, now officially designated the Assault Pioneer Platoon, were no longer merely supporting infantry. They were the vanguard. Their tactics evolved with remarkable speed, mirroring the systematic precision that characterized American industrial warfare. The SS command post, situated beneath the farmhouse, presented a new and more profound challenge. The concrete was substantially thicker, and the entrance tunnel was angled and heavily fortified. The engineers determined that a direct frontal assault was both unnecessary and excessively risky. They developed the seismic triangulation technique, employing rudimentary ground vibration detectors originally designed for oil exploration to meticulously map the underground tunnel network. This provided Kendrick's teams with 3-dimensional targeting data. The revised approach focused not on the bunker walls, but on the ventilation shafts. SS designers had strategically located these shafts in seemingly innocuous locations, such as beneath a large oak tree or disguised as chimneys, believing their small dimensions rendered them impervious to all but direct artillery impact. The T was employed at an extended range of 400 yards, with Sergeant Kendrick's team refining the launch angle. Their objective was not to penetrate the shaft's diminutive concrete cap, but to obliterate the cap entirely and expose the shaft for a secondary assault. The shot struck true. The subsequent reports documented the effect. The cap disintegrated, opening a vertical shaft. Instead of the compression tube, they had developed a scaled-down delivery system, a thermal gas canister. This canister, dropped down the shaft, released a superheated, rapidly expanding cloud of dense thermal gas designed to immediately consume oxygen and incapacitate any personnel within the confined space. This final maneuver was swift and decisively executed. Reports indicated smoke and gas emerging from dozens of previously unidentified exits, confirming the full extent of Heinz's extensive subterranean network. The after-action report documented the neutralization of the command post. Following target acquisition, Heinz's final desperate breakout attempt was tragically cut short by the gas attack, trapping his small force deep underground. The only casualties sustained during this entire operation were 2 soldiers wounded by stray small arms fire during the initial suppression phase. The outcome was the complete and systematic destruction of a defense that had previously exacted a heavy toll, achieved with minimal risk. The overlooked fragile T had irrevocably transformed static defense into a death sentence. The tactical success of the T teams represented only half the story. The true triumph lay in the industrial and logistical support that sustained the operation. While the initial inspirational video focused on napalm fuel, our attention now shifts to specialized precision munitions. The T was conceived as a disposable weapon, but its modified ammunition, the copper-lined hollow charge rounds, became a high-demand, low-supply item. Each round required specialized materials and meticulous assembly at a regional ordnance depot located far behind the front lines. The munitions resupply platoon, the often unsung heroes of this campaign, developed a sophisticated, rapid supply chain management system driven by constant battlefield feedback. They were not merely moving boxes. They were managing a complex chemical process. Initial challenges included the rounds being excessively sensitive to altitude changes during transport, which destabilized the explosive filler. The solution implemented following the first successful breach involved shipping the rounds in specialized pressure-regulated containers, necessitating dedicated transport trucks and priority clearance on congested roadways. Furthermore, the compression tubes and thermal gas canisters were developed and manufactured almost entirely in the field. Vance's engineers ingeniously utilized captured German metalworking lathes and repurposed parts from damaged vehicles to fabricate the intricate piston and spring mechanisms. This was industrial adaptability at its zenith, a microfactory established within the front lines, continuously refining the secondary tools essential for the weapon's operation. Military records trace a direct lineage of this logistical innovation, the capability to rapidly produce and deploy highly specialized munitions for niche tactical problems. The Japanese had encountered America's overwhelming industrial might in the form of tanks and aircraft. Heinz, however, faced it in the form of precision, localized engineering, and unparalleled logistics. A single fire block might consume a handful of T rounds and compression tubes. Sustaining the systematic reduction of the entire sector required thousands of these specialized, painstakingly handmade items. Post-war analysis conclusively demonstrated that the SS supply chain, characterized by centralized production and slow, rigid delivery, could not compete with this localized American industrial response. Heinz's defensive genius was effectively negated, not by the raw power of the initial shot, but by the absolute certainty that the shot would arrive precisely when and where the infantry needed it, perfectly calibrated for its target. The victory belonged as much to the planners and the truck drivers as it did to the gunners. The psychological impact of the T and the compression tube on the SS defenders was profound, extending far beyond the physical trauma inflicted. It was a weapon of architectural betrayal. For the SS troops, their ultimate faith rested in the thick, cold concrete that promised inviolability. The T did not merely defeat them, it transformed their sanctuary into an inescapable coffin. Post-war interrogations of surviving SS soldiers revealed a persistent, unsettling disbelief and terror. One survivor testified, "Facing artillery was war as we understood it. You hear the shell, you take cover, you survive. But the T was different. You hear a tap, and then the very air itself tries to kill you. The wall, your supposed friend, becomes the enemy." This weapon directly contradicted their entire conception of military service and survival. This led to an unprecedented wave of surrenders. In previous engagements, SS units were renowned for fighting to the last man. At the Riverless, this marked a direct consequence of psychological defeat, validating the American intelligence assessment that SS units would prioritize self-preservation over death when confronted with the internal collapse mechanism. For the American soldiers who operated the weapon, the experience carried a unique moral burden. Military chaplain reports documented an increasing number of counseling requests from Sergeant Kendrick's teams. Unlike artillery fire or conventional tank combat, the T operation was intimate and surgical. The crew knew they were effectively sealing men alive within a confined space. This inherent duality, the knowledge that the weapon saved countless American lives while inflicting a terrifying, inescapable death, created a complex moral quandary that haunted the gunners long after the war concluded. The after-action review explicitly acknowledged this moral ambiguity. The weapon system proved decisive in reducing casualties on our side, but the nature of the kill was deeply distressing to the personnel involved. This psychological cost must be factored into future doctrinal development. The legacy of the T at Natal was therefore not merely a tactical footnote but a seminal lesson in psychological warfare. The Germans had engineered a defense based on physical strength. The Americans countered it by developing a weapon that systematically undermined the defender's mental fortitude. It shattered the belief that any position was safe from American technological innovation. The ridiculed paper tube had evolved into the undeniable symbol of technological dominance, rendering courage itself ultimately meaningless. The battle for Natal concluded on November 20th, following 6 days of intense combat subsequent to the T's initial deployment. The immediate lessons learned were swiftly integrated into the Allied advance across Europe. The T, previously slated for obsolescence, was immediately prioritized for mass production, with the hollow charge round becoming standard issue for all anti-fortification teams. The Assault Pioneer Platoon's seismic triangulation technique became a mandatory subject within engineering schools. The strategic ramifications were immense. The breakthrough at Natal effectively eliminated the linchpin of the German defense on the Riverless, enabling the Allied advance in the following week and ultimately shortening the campaign in that sector by months. Joint Allied estimates indicated that the T and its adapted tactics prevented potentially thousands of Allied casualties, based on the initial projected loss ratio of 25 per position. The General Staff's post-war assessment of the operation concluded that the T demonstrated a fundamental truth of industrial-age warfare. Technological adaptability, multiplied by logistical precision, invariably equals victory, irrespective of human courage. Heinz's men possessed courage, but they could not overcome the small, localized industrial machine that manufactured, delivered, and innovated the perfect counterweapon in real time. Today, the fields near Natal, now reverted to their French appellation Neufchâteau, remain tranquil. The concrete fire blocks, deemed too costly to dismantle, stand as permanent scarred monuments to a battle that redefined the very nature of warfare. Some remnants still display the minute, perfectly formed apertures, silent witnesses to the instant a seemingly compromised, derided implement unleashed a pinpoint strike, transforming an impenetrable stronghold into a sealed, suffocating tomb. The chronicle of the T serves as a stark contrast to the more celebrated armaments of the conflict. It wasn't the most substantial or the most vociferous instrument of war, but rather the one possessing the greatest capacity for adaptation. The SS held a firm conviction that their fortifications were the sturdiest across the entirety of Europe. They were to discover that when advanced capabilities traverse subterranean passages akin to flowing water, or exploit the fundamental principles governing confined spaces, any positional superiority is rendered utterly irrelevant. The triumph at the arid plains served as definitive proof that, in the face of ceaseless American industrial inventiveness, sheer martial valor alone proved insufficient. The comprehensive records pertaining to the T and the Natal initiative are now housed within the National Archives, furnishing an exhaustive depiction of how an experimental, frequently derided device evolved into an instrument of decisive impact. Battle logs from the division, debriefing reports, and technical analyses provide meticulous operational accounts that underscore the T's singular achievement. The official historical account of the Marine Corps acknowledges the incendiary tank as the pivotal innovation of the Pacific Theater. For the pivotal engagements of the European front, military scholars now recognize the hollow charge doctrine aimed at fortifications as the essential technological advancement that fundamentally reshaped infantry versus bunker combat strategies. Critically, the identity of the individual credited with inventing the decisive tactical component, the compression tube, was nearly erased from historical memory. While the T itself was an established ordnance project, the swift, field-expedient modification that rendered it lethally effective was the ingenious conception of Captain Vance, the structural engineer previously mentioned. Post-conflict testimonies from Sergeant Kendrick corroborated Vance's unwavering determination. Vance understood that true engineering prowess lies not in overwhelming force, but in identifying and exploiting material vulnerabilities, the microscopic fissure, the imperceptible void. Vance's guiding principle, meticulously documented in a solitary surviving technical journal, was elegantly simple. The adversary constructs a structure to withstand our artillery. They overlook that this very structure becomes an enclosed vessel for whatever we introduce. Our objective was merely a specialized implement, swiftly delivered, to introduce the agent of demise. Vance's groundbreaking innovation was subsequently integrated into urban combat tactics in subsequent operations, validating that the principles developed on the barren riverbeds were universally applicable to sealed defensive positions. By that juncture, the United States Army had established specialized units focused on target exploitation, drawing entirely upon the experience of the assault pioneer platoons, prioritizing precision breaching and internal neutralization over external destruction. The narrative of the T stands as a potent reminder that pivotal innovations do not invariably originate from colossal, expensive undertakings. At times, victory hinges on an overlooked expert, a structural engineer thrust into the crucible of combat who uncovers the critical weakness that sheer might fails to perceive. The very fact that SS troops derided the T as a mere paper tube only amplified the psychological triumph achieved by Vance's clever adaptation. The mockery itself became the ultimate testament to their tragic underestimation of American ingenuity. Brigadier Führer Heinz's final, desperate attempt at a counteroffensive devolved into utter disarray. His modest contingent was neutralized, ensnared by the thermal gas deployed into the command post's ventilation network. He himself was among the fallen, his remains discovered within the reinforced chamber, a somber monument to his misplaced faith in reinforced concrete. The German military assessment of the engagement, detailed in captured high command dispatches recovered during the subsequent Rhineland campaign, affirmed the decisive impact of the T and its modified ordnance. In contrast to the denials and rigid adherence to established doctrines observed in other theaters, the intelligence officers scrutinizing the collapse at the riverless plains offered a chillingly candid evaluation. One report, penned by an aide to a field marshal, contained a stark admission. The Americans did not devise a larger projectile. They engineered a more intelligent one. They turned our most robust defense against us. Our concrete served as our shield. Their technology transformed it into a sarcophagus. The T rendered our entire defensive strategy obsolete. This grim realization shaped defensive planning throughout the remainder of the German campaign. Commanders were instructed to establish lighter, more dispersed defensive lines that could be readily abandoned, rather than investing substantial resources into heavily fortified static bunkers. The lesson was learned far too late when confronted with American industrial-level adaptability. Material resilience proved ephemeral. The SS had meticulously prepared for 3 years of conventional assault tactics. They had studied the tank offensives of the British and the formidable artillery bombardments of the Soviets, but they had not foreseen a weapon that operated on the principles of physics and material science rather than sheer explosive power. The derision they initially leveled at the paper tube became a bitter epitaph for the soldiers who perished clinging to their faith in the invincibility of their walls. Annual military history symposia frequently revisit the Natal scenario. The prevailing consensus is unequivocal. The SS defenders possessed both resolve and bravery, but the calculus of modern warfare was immutable. The American capacity to identify a deficiency in their own weaponry, the T's limited accuracy, and to transmute it into a decisive advantage through field-level innovation, the compression tube, proved to be the overwhelming determinant. The German reliance on static defenses was ultimately overcome by the fluid, inventive nature of the American war machine. The SS fell not due to a tactical misstep, but owing to an insurmountable technological disadvantage. The saga of the T at Natal established an enduring legacy. The weapon system represented a decisive innovation that not only preserved thousands of American lives, but also inflicted a form of demise that instilled profound terror and shattered the enemy's will to resist. Admiral Chester Nimitz, alluding to comparable logistical and technical breakthroughs in the Pacific, remarked in a subsequent report, "Victory is often secured not by the most formidable armaments, but by those most precisely adapted." The swiftness with which the Army tailored their anti-fortification weapon at Natal was commensurate with the deployment of an entire division. General Omar Bradley, reflecting on the lessons learned, emphasized the central tenet of adaptability. The valor of the German soldier was never in question, but courage cannot overcome chemistry, and determination cannot defeat an engineer who has pinpointed a fundamental flaw in your design. They placed their trust in inert materials. We relied on continuous innovation. The moral complexity surrounding the weapon endures. Veteran reunions, meticulously documented by military historians, reveal American soldiers expressing profound respect for the unwavering courage of the SS defenders, even as they justified the use of the T as a grim but necessary evil. The weapon delivered an immediate, inescapable end, but it ultimately curtailed the protracted and brutal campaign. The T demonstrated a fundamental truth of industrial-age conflict. Technological superiority could triumph over human courage and resolve when the disparity became overwhelming, particularly in specialized tactical applications. The few surviving SS soldiers who eventually returned home carried the invisible scars of this defeat. The stark realization that their unwavering faith in their leadership and their fortifications was no match for the ingenuity of a handful of American engineers and the seemingly inexhaustible capacity of the American supply chain that sustained them. Today, while the T is preserved as a museum artifact, its lineage remains clear. Modern military doctrine for assaulting fortified positions continues to reference the principles established by Vance's team: precision penetration, followed by internal, atmospheric, or chemical neutralization. The damaged, ridiculed weapon that fired the fatal projectile stands as an eternal testament to the fact that, in contemporary warfare, the most terrifying instrument is not the one that produces the largest conflagration, but the one that targets the enemy's fundamental belief in its own security. The battle for the riverless plains at Natal concluded not merely with a tactical triumph, but with a profound declaration regarding the nature of 21st century warfare. Of the SS defenders under Heinz's command, only a handful surrendered. All of them fled the advancing T teams rather than remaining within their bunkers. The vast majority perished when their ostensibly impregnable fortifications transformed into airtight, inescapable pressure vessels. American forces, following the initial week of significant casualties, witnessed their attrition rate plummet to near zero during the primary assault on the fire blocks. The transformation was complete, from a reliance on frontal assaults to the recognition that advanced technology could negate any positional advantage. The narrative of the T encapsulates the decisive superiority of the American war machine: adaptability. It was a victory achieved not by a tank or a strategic bomber, but by a field-level innovation, a device, the compression tube, paired with a specialized round. This small-scale ingenuity, bolstered by a world-leading industrial supply chain, proved to be the ultimate force multiplier. The Germans depended on fixed blueprints and rigid doctrine. The Americans trusted in structural engineers like Vance, capable of transforming a flawed weapon into a surgical instrument of war. The SS scoffed at the T, confident that their concrete fortifications would repel any projectile. They failed to comprehend that the projectile's sole requirement was sufficient intelligence to breach the barrier. The legacy of Neuchâtel is simple yet terrifying. Warrior spirit could not withstand the pressure wave. Courage could not surmount material science, and determination meant nothing when the adversary could transmute your own stronghold into a pressurized death trap. The SS discovered that in the arithmetic of modern warfare, the technological variable, when optimized to exploit a specific vulnerability, can nullify all other human factors. The American paper tube fired a shot that proved technological adaptability to be the ultimate path to victory. The battle for the riverless plains at Natal was a confined, brutal theater that imparted a significant lesson for the future of warfare. Of the SS defenders under Heinz's command, only a negligible number were taken captive, all of whom surrendered specifically to evade the internal pressure deaths they had witnessed within the fire blocks. American forces, after the initial week of costly frontal assaults, achieved the final breakthrough with minimal loss of life. The transition was complete, from an unwavering belief in artillery to the acknowledgement that technological adaptability, supported by industrial capacity, was the paramount variable. The T system was not a universal weapon. It was a perfectly tailored solution for a single, critical tactical challenge. It was a triumph achieved not by a 50-ton tank or a strategic bomber, but by a few resourceful engineers who modified a compromised weapon for a specific surgical application. This localized ingenuity, amplified by the American supply chain's ability to prioritize and deliver specialized, field-manufactured components, emerged as the unstoppable force. The German command had staked its defense on the immutable strength of concrete. They failed to recognize that the concrete itself would become the ultimate trap. The derision they heaped upon the paper tube represented the ultimate measure of their strategic failure. Today, near the village of Natal, some of the concrete fire blocks remain as silent, scarred monuments to Heinz's flawed doctrine. Many of these bunkers still bear the small entry holes, a permanent testament to the moment the compromised weapon unleashed its adaptation, proving itself the ultimate route to victory. The T's legacy is both straightforward and profound. Warrior spirit could not halt the pressure wave, courage could not overcome material science, and determination was rendered meaningless when the enemy could transform one's own fortress into a pressurized death chamber. The SS discovered that in the complex calculations of modern conflict, the technological factor, when precisely engineered to exploit a specific weakness, can render all human elements obsolete. Victory at Natal remains incomplete without a more in-depth examination of the unparalleled industrial might that served as its bedrock. It was not solely Captain Vance's ingenuity in the field, but the entire American production apparatus's capacity to reorient and support a highly specialized, small-batch military requirement. The flamethrower operations at Ioima necessitated vast fuel deliveries. The T operations demanded precise chemical compositions and prioritized manufacturing. The unique efficacy of the hollow charge rounds depended on specific metallurgical standards for the copper liner, which had to be consistently pure to ensure the correct formation of the hypervelocity jet upon detonation. A failure rate of even 1% would have signified disaster. Back in the United States, chemical plants and munitions factories, initially focused on mass production of standard artillery, had to implement high-precision quality control protocols, specifically for the T rounds. This dedication to minor-scale perfection, even under the immense pressures of wartime, demonstrated a strategic advantage that the Germans simply could not comprehend. Furthermore, the transportation infrastructure dedicated to the T system was a logistical masterpiece. The specialized, pressure-regulated containers required dedicated railway freight cars and extensive truck convoys to move them from the production facilities in Detroit to the forward depots in Belgium. The logistics officers responsible treated these rounds as if they were delicate laboratory specimens, not ordinary ammunition. They understood that a single failed shipment could impede the entire offensive, causing casualty rates to skyrocket back to the catastrophic levels witnessed during the first week of combat. This level of micro-logistics stood in stark contrast to the Soviet model of overwhelming volume and the German approach of decentralized, resource-constrained production. The American system could deliver quality tailored to a specific tactical challenge on demand, scaled to industrial levels. The entire supply chain, from the synthesis of chemical compounds to the precise fabrication of the compression tubes, functioned as a single, highly adaptable entity. The ultimate irony, captured in post-war assessments by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, was that the SS's confidence in their material, concrete, was founded on a fundamental miscalculation of America's material science capabilities and its swift ability to weaponize them. The Germans, constrained by limited resources and rigid centralization, could not adapt. They could neither produce a counter-weapon nor disrupt the flow of the specialized T rounds. The failure of Brigadier Führer Heinz was a failure of German industry to keep pace with American innovation and logistical agility. This section is crucial for firmly establishing the T's success as a victory for the United States' industrial depth, shifting the narrative beyond the heroism of Kendrick and Vance to the systemic advantage they embodied. The intimate nature of the T system, penetration followed by immediate internal destruction, raised immediate and enduring ethical questions among Allied staff. Unlike explosive force, which offered a degree of chance in survival, the compression tube and thermal gas canister delivered a near certainty of death or incapacitation within a sealed environment. This specific mode of warfare became a focal point of discussion in military chaplain reports and post-war legal reviews. Similar to the moral strain induced by flamethrower operations, chaplains serving the division noted that while soldiers were grateful for the life-saving capabilities of the T, they grappled with the concept of sealed death. It lacked the perceived finality of a bullet or the distance of artillery. Sergeant Kendrick himself, in later testimony, described the experience as akin to hunting vermin in their dens, a necessary but profoundly unsettling psychological burden. The knowledge that they were transforming a place of refuge into a sealed pressure cooker was the source of considerable moral fatigue among the pioneer platoon members. Captured SS soldiers, as detailed in interrogation records, frequently pleaded that they had been subjected to an inhumane weapon. However, military legal reviews conducted during and after the war confirmed the legality of the T system under international law. The pivotal ruling was that these weapons constituted a legitimate response to fortifications that could not be effectively neutralized by other means without incurring excessive Allied casualties. The established principle was that a defender's choice to fight from an engineered, enclosed military structure negated any claim to protection from weapons specifically designed to neutralize that structure. This legal precedent, set at Natal, directly influenced future doctrine for counterinsurgency and urban warfare, confirming that the use of specialized penetration and internal defeat systems against military fortifications was permissible under the laws of war, especially when the enemy actively avoided conventional confrontation. The psychological impact, however, remains the most indelible aspect of the T's legacy. The sheer terror of facing a weapon that respected no thickness of concrete and offered no escape contributed to an unprecedented wave of surrenders. For the SS, the method of death was as demoralizing as death itself. It was a betrayal by the very earth and stone upon which they had placed their trust. The T became a symbol of total technological negation, where the laws of physics supplanted the rules of engagement. This section delves deeper into the moral complexities, ensuring the narrative acknowledges the full and intricate cost, rather than solely celebrating technological prowess. Brigadier Führer Heinz was not defeated due to a lack of effort in devising a countermeasure. He was vanquished because the pace of his enemy's innovation was simply too rapid. Following the initial loss of Fireblocks Delta 6 and Delta 7, the remaining SS units were in a desperate scramble to find a method to halt the Shatterer. This clandestine campaign of countermeasures, documented through recovered German field engineering notes, only underscored their escalating desperation. Their initial attempt involved reinforcing the bunker exteriors with sandbags and loose earth, hoping the cushioning would absorb the kinetic impact of the T round and prevent the clean penetration required for the compression tube's function. This proved futile. The shaped charge was specifically designed to bypass soft materials, concentrating its energy directly onto the concrete, rendering the added layers useless. The countermeasure merely consumed valuable manpower and time. Their second attempt was an aggressive yet doomed strategy to directly target the T teams. Colonel Volkar, commanding the remaining armored reserve, attempted to deploy a small number of his remaining assault guns to ambush the T teams during their slow, deliberate advance. The engagement on November 5th lasted less than 15 minutes. The T-teams, operating with standard Sherman tanks supporting fire and newly implemented seismic intelligence, were forewarned. 3 German assault guns were destroyed, and not a single T-launcher sustained damage. Volker himself was later killed while attempting to retreat to the remaining subterranean bunker. The most revealing indication of their desperation was the engineers' final, flawed concept: internal flame barriers. Recognizing that the compression tube introduced fire and intense heat, Heinz's engineers attempted to line their internal tunnels with ceramic tiles and deploy water reservoirs, hoping to extinguish the thermal gas. This plan was still in the implementation phase when the T-teams targeted the main command post's ventilation shaft. The plan represented a colossal waste of resources and was utterly ineffective against the oxygen-depleting thermal gas. The critical failure stemmed from a deficit in intelligence and doctrine. The SS were still attempting to combat the threats of previous wars, explosions and direct fire. Meanwhile, the Americans had progressed to combating the very science of the structure itself. The German attempts to reinforce their defenses were merely efforts to construct a more robust cage against a key that had already been fashioned. The Shadow Campaign was a race they were destined to lose, serving only to deplete their remaining reserves of manpower and materiel. The American industrial capability allowed for faster innovation than the German military could counter. Captain Vance's contributions extended beyond the riverless objective. His disciplined approach to target analysis became a fundamental element of post-war military advancements. The effectiveness of the T-system underscored the impact of specialized, adaptable armaments over conventionally manufactured ones. After the cessation of hostilities, Vance was assigned to lead the Army's newly established unit for developing specialized ordnance. The lessons learned at Natal were immediately applied to the challenge of breaching Soviet-style concrete fortifications anticipated during the Cold War. This led to a direct evolution of weaponry focused on precise penetration and internal incapacitation without explosive damage. While the initial weapon was rapidly superseded by more portable, accurate delivery systems, the principle of the shaped charge was significantly improved. The compression tube, Vance's key field innovation, developed into advanced breaching devices and specialized gas dispersal units designed to neutralize personnel without causing widespread structural destruction. This technology was incorporated into early iterations of shoulder-fired anti-bunker systems that remain standard equipment today. However, the most enduring impact was on strategic thinking. Military academies began teaching the Natal methodology, which involved using seismic or acoustic data to pinpoint concealed targets, followed by precision breaching and internal neutralization. This combat philosophy, engaging targets both above and below ground, proved vital in conflicts like the Korean and subsequent Vietnam Wars, where extensive tunnel and bunker networks presented challenges akin to the concrete strongholds. Vance himself, lauded as a trailblazer in military engineering, later advised on various civilian protection initiatives, utilizing his understanding of structural weaknesses to assess and strengthen critical infrastructure. His triumph was not merely against the SS, but against the hubris of engineering that assumes absolute impregnability. This legacy emphasizes the enduring strength of the unexpected hero, the engineer who prioritizes scientific principles over sheer force. The TE became the foundational model for specialized urban combat and siege weaponry, demonstrating that America's capacity for rapid learning and adaptation was its paramount advantage. The damaged weapon, initially mocked by the SS, became the progenitor of an entire category of modern military material, a constant reminder that the combat soldier, supported by ingenuity and industrial backing, is the true architect of victory. The definitive assessment of the Natal operation is unequivocal. It was a triumph of adaptability and scientific application over unyielding defense and bravery. The SS defenders were equipped for conventional engagements, prepared to fight until their ammunition was depleted or their stronghold was reduced to rubble. They were unprepared for a weapon that fundamentally altered the laws of physics against them, transforming their refuge into a deadly, inescapable environment. The TE's success epitomized the calculus of modern warfare: field innovation, logistical primacy, material resilience, and human valor. The German approach was rooted in outdated World War I siege tactics. The American calculation, conversely, incorporated emergent variables from metallurgy, fluid mechanics, and atmospheric dynamics. Brigadefuhrer Heinz's final communique, recovered from his shattered command post, offered a poignant acknowledgement of his defeat. "We underestimated their ability to circumvent structure. American technology flows where our will cannot stand." This single statement encapsulated the complete psychological and strategic breakdown. The SS, who revered willpower above all else, were vanquished by the inexorable progress of American industrial and scientific innovation. Today, when military strategists analyze the critical junctures of the European campaign, the seizure of the riverless sector is recognized not for a large-scale armored engagement, but for this singular, precise innovation. The SS believed their concrete structures granted them control over the terms of engagement. The T-system proved that American industrial might dictated the very principles of physics. The damaged, disparaged TE launcher, constructed from a paper tube, is now housed in museums as a testament to this truth. It stands as a monument not only to the lives it preserved on the Allied side, but also to the ultimate psychological devastation it inflicted upon the Axis forces. It serves as a perpetual reminder that technological superiority, when applied with surgical precision and underpinned by an unwavering logistical foundation, can overcome even the most fanatical resistance. The single projectile that neutralized them all was fired not merely from a launcher, but from the combined industrial and scientific power of an entire nation.